The sun hadn't fully risen over the Missouri hills when the neighbors first noticed the figure moving through the gray pre-dawn, a young man, lean from too much work and not enough meals, pushing a wheelbarrow slowly through the morning mist. The load in it wasn't corn, it wasn't seed. It wasn't anything anyone in Clover Ridge had ever seen a farmer haul across a field at 5 in the morning. It was ash. His name was Caleb Harmon, and he was 26 years old. Bucketfuls of it, pale gray and light as breath, spilling slightly over the edges of the barrow as he navigated the uneven ground. He moved deliberately, row by row, across the 30-acre plot that sat behind the old Harmon property, the same land that had barely produced a profitable crop in 2 consecutive seasons. Dale Whitmore saw him from the road and slowed his truck. He watched for a long moment, then leaned out the window. "Harmon boy's spreading fireplace soot on his fields," he said to his passenger, and they both laughed as the truck rolled on. By that afternoon, half the town knew. By the weekend, it had become a running joke. At the hardware store, at the grain elevator, over coffee at Patsy's Diner on Main Street, people were talking about the young Harmon kid and his wheelbarrow full of ash. Nobody asked him why, and Caleb never explained. If stories about ordinary people turning overlooked ideas into extraordinary success inspire you, you're in the right place. Stay with us until the very end, and while you're watching, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. What the neighbors saw was strange. What they didn't see was everything else. They didn't see the letters from the bank on the kitchen table. They didn't see the soil test reports with circled numbers that kept Caleb awake past midnight. They didn't see the old journal he'd found tucked inside a wooden box in his grandfather's barn. Water-stained pages, filled with handwriting that was careful and small, written by a man who had farmed this same land for 40 years. Caleb had inherited the farm 2 years ago when his grandfather, Earl Harmon, passed quietly in the spring. Earl had no children of his own. Caleb, Earl's only grandchild on his sister's side, had grown up visiting the farm every summer. He knew the smell of the soil after rain. He knew which fields flooded and which ones dried out first. He knew the farm the way you know the house you grew up in, not perfectly, but deeply. What he didn't know was how to save it. The bank held a note on the property. 2 missed harvest seasons had put Caleb behind. The soil had problems that went beyond weather. It was depleted, acidic in patches, and starved of the minerals that productive crops required. His first year's corn had germinated unevenly and yielded less than half what it should have. The second year wasn't much better. He tried what the county extension agent suggested. He tried what he could afford from the co-op. Nothing moved the numbers enough. Then, one wet November evening, he sat down with his grandfather's journal. Earl Harmon hadn't been a conventional farmer. He had been an observer, a man who wrote down what he noticed, season after season, with the patience of someone who understood that land keeps its own schedule. One passage, dated nearly 40 years back, stopped Caleb cold, burned the old brush piles out by the creek fence, hauled the ash to the east field before the snow. Come spring, that patch came up stronger than anything else I planted. Used to think it was luck. Don't think so anymore. Caleb read that entry 3 times. He spent the next 2 weeks at the county library and online, piecing together what his grandfather had intuitively discovered. Burnt wood ash, he learned, is rich in potassium and calcium, 2 nutrients that depleted soils often desperately lack. More importantly, it can help neutralize soil acidity over time, shifting the pH toward a range where crops can actually absorb the nutrients already present in the ground. But he also read the warnings. Wood ash applied carelessly, in excess, or to soil that doesn't need it, can swing the pH too far in the wrong direction, lock out other nutrients, and damage the very plants it's meant to help. It wasn't a universal fix. It was a tool. And like any tool, it only worked when you understood what you were working on. Caleb got his soil tested, properly this time, broken down by section. The results confirmed what he'd suspected. The east and southeast portions of his fields were acidic and potassium poor. The north sections were different, more balanced, needing a gentler hand. He drew a map. He made a plan. And then he started collecting ash. He burned old fence posts, He collected ash from neighbors who had fire pits and wood stoves and thought he was simply being eccentric. He drove across 2 counties to pick up ash from a sawmill that was otherwise going to landfill it. He cataloged everything in his notebook: source, quantity, application rate, field section. At Patsy's diner, the jokes grew louder. Someone had started calling him Ash Boy. Caleb heard it. He went back to his wheelbarrow. Spring came cold and reluctant that year, the way Missouri springs sometimes do. Warm one week, frostbitten the next, the sky cycling between pale blue and gray, without committing to either. Caleb applied the ash carefully, working it into the top several inches of soil with a tiller, giving it weeks to interact with the ground before planting. He kept meticulous records. He planted test rows, identical seed, identical spacing, some on ash-amended ground, some without. By June, there was a difference. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that would make the local paper. But Caleb could see it. The rows where the soil had been prepared were greener, fuller. The corn leaves were broader and stood straighter in the afternoon heat. There were setbacks. A late frost killed a section of early plantings, and he had to replant at a cost he could barely absorb. A stretch of dry weeks in late June made him water more than planned. He found a fungal issue in one corner of the field that had nothing to do with ash and everything to do with drainage, and he spent 3 hard days digging a trench to redirect the runoff. He adapted. He didn't stop. He also found a mentor that summer, an older woman named Ruth Calloway, who had farmed river-bottom land in the next county for 30 years and had used wood ash quietly and consistently for most of that time. She didn't have a YouTube channel. She didn't have a following. She had dark, healthy soil and yields that consistently outperformed her neighbors, and she was happy to talk to a young man who came to her with specific questions and an open notebook. "You're doing it right," she told him, looking at his records. "Most people either don't do it at all or they dump too much. You're reading your soil. That's the whole game." August arrived with a heat wave that old-timers said hadn't been seen since the 90s. Temperatures pushed past 100 for 9 consecutive days. The humidity dropped. The soil began to crack in the low fields. Across Clover Ridge, the damage was visible. Dale Whitmore's corn curled at the edges within the first week. 2 operations east of town reported significant yield loss before the month was finished. Everyone was watching the sky, waiting for rain that moved slowly and promised more than it delivered. More than once that August, a pickup truck slowed on the county road that ran along the edge of Caleb's property. Drivers looked through the fence line, then looked back at their own withering rows. Some turned around and drove the stretch again. The contrast was quiet but undeniable. Caleb's amended section still standing, still green at the base, while fields on every side had begun to give way. Caleb's fields were not immune. He would be honest about that later. But they held up differently than his neighbors. The amended sections, soils prepared through the winter and spring, retained moisture better. The root systems had developed more extensively, reaching deeper into ground that was no longer as compacted or acidic as it had been 2 years prior. The corn didn't thrive in the heat, but it endured. When the rains finally came in late August, gentle and consistent over 4 days, Caleb walked his rows in the early morning and felt something shift in his chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite pride. It was something quieter than both. By harvest, the difference was undeniable. His yield was significantly higher than the previous 2 seasons. More importantly, it was higher than several neighboring operations that had spent far more on commercial inputs. Word travels fast in small farming communities. Dale Whitmore stopped by in October, hat in his hand. He asked to walk the fields first, before he even looked at the numbers, and Caleb obliged, leading him row by row across the same ground Dale had driven past laughing all those months before. Dale was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his expression carried the particular discomfort of a man revising a judgment he'd made too quickly. "What did you do different?" Dale asked. Caleb didn't make him wait. He walked him through the soil tests, the ash preparation, the records he'd kept, and everything he'd learned from Ruth Calloway. He showed him the journal sections his grandfather had written 40 years before. He answered every question honestly, including the ones about what hadn't worked and why. Over the following weeks, 3 other farmers came by. He shared with all of them. The notebook pages got photocopied. Ruth Calloway received a few new visitors of her own. The knowledge moved through the community the way good knowledge usually does, slowly, informally, through conversations at field edges and after church on Sunday mornings. Nobody called him Ash Boy anymore. Nobody needed to. Before we wrap up, if you enjoy stories like this and want to learn the real farming wisdom that's been passed down through generations, I have something special for you. I wrote a book called 101 Farming Secrets Grandparents Knew. Timeless country wisdom for healthier soil, bigger harvests, and a more self-sufficient life. It's filled with 101 practical, time-tested lessons on healthier soil, bigger harvests, natural growing methods, and self-sufficient living. If you'd like to own this collection and revisit these timeless techniques anytime, you'll find the link in the description below. I hope it becomes a valuable resource on your farming journey. Now, let's get back to the story. The following spring, Caleb planted his fields again. This time, he expanded the ash preparation to every section that had tested low, more methodically, with 2 full seasons of real data guiding every decision. He kept a dedicated burn pile going year-round now, fallen timber, dead brush cleared from the field edges, managing it in small, careful quantities and collecting the ash deliberately, the way his grandfather once had without quite knowing why. What had been waste was now part of the work. The American agriculturist Liberty Hyde Bailey once wrote, "A garden requires patient labor and attention. Plants do not grow merely to satisfy ambitions or to fulfill good intentions." Caleb had learned the truth of that in the most direct way a man can learn anything, through failure, through observation, through the stubborn decision to keep going when it would have been far easier to walk away. He had not willed his soil back to health. He had not simply wanted it hard enough. He had listened to the land. He had tested it, mapped it, amended it with care, and then waited, through drought and ridicule and doubt, for it to respond on its own terms. The fields of Clover Ridge remembered that patience, and so, in the end, did the people who had once laughed at the young man with his wheelbarrow full of ash. If this story reminded you that the greatest harvests are built on patience, observation, and the courage to do things differently, subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Iowa, Ontario, Yorkshire, or Queensland, we'd love to know who's out there farming alongside us.